Oh, a little late start today, folks, but better late than never. That's what they say anyway.
Yeah.
Good morning, YouTube folks. Welcome to the hotspot. Gotta get this tweeted and blue skied out, and then I will pull up the pod. Blue sky post. Back to this. Switching the record button on me again. Hello there, and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot here on HawkFanatic.com. Thursday, January the 16th, 9:25 a.m. Central Time. A little bit of a later start, but we're here better late than never. I'm Rob Howe, joined by Scott Docterman from The Athletic. Um, Scott, we are kind of in the dog days of January now, and the transfer portal talk has kind of calmed down, and people are mad at the basketball teams, and it's kind of business as usual. But it almost feels like people are kind of just recalibrating here as the next semester starts to get revved up again after the holidays.
It wouldn't be Iowa if people weren't complaining about something, if it's not the weather, because it is mid-January and we haven't had the severity yet. It's coming. We
Coming.
know it's yeah, we know it's coming, but it's the sports teams, it's whatever, So here we are, mid-January. There's some angst there about everything from football, the transfer portal, whether they signed enough or spent too much, or the basketball team's not performing or whatever. It's business as usual, as they say.
Yep, and we've got a national championship game coming up on Monday and some other things happening in the world. I can't remember what, but national championship game on Monday. We'll pick that. We've got a Big Ten team in there, so we can pick that game.
Yeah,
We may have picked it anyway, but now we can officially pick it and add it to our yearly total,
yeah.
which I'm not sure I want to see. I don't
No,
think
you did great.
did
You,
I? Okay.
yeah. You're like 8 games above 500. So
All right, I'll take it. So we'll playing with
you
house money here for the national championship game.
you made
But
money this year. That's nothing to sneeze at. So
looking forward to this one though, Scott. This should be
oh yeah.
fun. And which I guess just generally overall, I think the seating is the obvious thing that needs to be fixed after year one of the expanded CFP. But overall, I think it's been pretty good. And it was funny watching the NFL playoffs last week, and there were blowouts, and I'm like, oh, there's blowouts in postseason action. Imagine that.
Rob, I have a story coming up on that on for Saturday, and I that was my yesterday. About 8 hours of crunching numbers, comparing. Yeah, I did it all night and part of this morning before we even got to talking about comparing the points since the implementation of the CFP, and how the point spreads, the margins between the winners and losers, NFL versus college football, and it's strikingly pretty similar because there are blowouts, and there are a lot of blowouts, and really the divisional round is probably in the NFC is usually about the closest of the last 10 plus years. So college football has had the same thing. It's just and what's funny is out of the first round, there was one team that didn't lose by 11 plus points. In the second round, there was in the college football. In the second round, the quarters, there's only one team that lost by 11 plus or 11 points or less. So Indiana and Arizona State were the ones that lost closest games. So Indiana, the one that everybody tried to drown as a rat or something invading the playoff.
I know. It's just, I think it seems to be increase in intensity as we move along with life, but the declarations that are need premature declarations that are made by sports fandom and analysts is, I guess it's to get the attention to be out there, but God, can we let things play out and then review and have an opinion? I guess that doesn't happen much anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, I've come to the conclusion, Rob, that the most hated team in America is the college football overachiever, is the team that invades the turf reserved for the blue bloods. And we saw it and we witnessed it firsthand in 2015 when Iowa had the audacity of winning every game it played in the regular season. The fake IDs of college football. And of course, they've still got between 8 and 10 players in the NFL still, Josie Jewell and George Kittle and players like that. Desmond King's with the Ravens, so you've
DJ
still
Beathard.
CJ Beathard, with the Jags. You see, you've got players still in the NFL, and guys like an Anthony Nelson who are, around and he was with the Buccaneers. He started last week. So it's there's this knee-jerk reaction, and it's about style and it's about sizzle. And if you don't meet one of those two criteria, then you just get destroyed. And Indiana was another one where, I watched them. I got to see them play up front, and they were awesome the day I was there. And it wasn't just because Nebraska had a bad day. Yeah, it did, but they were awesome. And they were awesome all year long. They had a great offense. They had a tremendous defense, which I was really surprised about. And they lost the two teams playing Monday night. And yet we've got people just crapping all over them at the very beginning. Considering all the other teams that were there, okay, this team had a point margin of nearly 28 win over loss and over the opponent. And then it also led the nation in run defense. So we're not going to let an 11-1 team from a major conference get in because their name is Indiana. Come on. That if nothing else, I'm more than angry about it. I'm really disappointed in Kirk Herbstreit about that, because I thought he was better than this. To have this knee-jerk opinion that just crapped all over a team's best season it ever had. And, when we dealt with it in 15, Boise State's dealt with it in the past. And I really just wish that this would, we can sit back, let it marinate. And I think if nothing else, though, that it was the hotheads on ESPN that went after Indiana, but really the sports writers of the world backed off. They were like, no, they deserve to be in there. And I thought this has been the best postseason I've ever seen for college football.
I think what we need, and I think what we'll get, is an upset, a really big upset, or one that where a team like Indiana, a non-blue blood, beats a blue blood that everybody sees as a potential championship team. And then we start to get evidence that these things can happen. And then people are less critical when teams like that make it in. But with 12 teams, it is about deserving. It is about who deserves to be there. Just because you're Alabama, your resume, you did I think you did a story on this towards the end of the year, the blind resume. I mean, that's the way it should be done. It shouldn't be because this team's in the SEC. I mean, obviously, strength of schedule is affected by what conference you play in, but those are numbers. I mean, those can be compared across different conferences. You can compare, a Mountain West resume with an SEC resume without knowing who the conferences is. You can see this strength of schedule. Just base it on that, man.
Yeah, there's so many different factors. And I mean, I think I look at like the Big Ten and the SEC, and you see the depth of the conferences and the teams you're playing week in and week out. And there is, it needs to be weighted for them. When you're playing, if you're Alabama and you're playing Georgia and you're playing Tennessee and, Ole Miss, LSU, whoever, yeah, those games are bigger than if you're playing, dare I say, in the Big 12 even, and you're playing some of those teams or the ACC. There's 2 or 3 teams that are in that category. The Big 10 has 6 or 7. And, Illinois was fantastic this year. Indiana was great. Iowa was competitive. You had teams, and then Michigan proved at the end of the year, where, by beating Ohio State and Alabama back to back, that it was.
I think Minnesota got better.
Yes. They lost by 1 point at home to Penn State. And they were a really good team. They won their bowl game too, and they won 8 games. And so there's a lot of depth, I think, in those conferences. And to me, there are ways they can handle it next year. I don't see them changing the format. I think there's going to be a lot of talk about wanting to change the seating, that how mixed up it was, and it was true. I mean, when every team that got a bye lost in the quarterfinals,
Yeah.
that says something a little bit, especially down towards the end. And you got Ohio State, which was an 8, and Notre Dame, which was a 7. I mean, come on, or 6. I'm sorry, but you have all of this, and I think when you go forward 2 years down the road, the 26th season is where there's discussion about whether to expand it to 14. I mean, I think 12 looks like a good number, but I can understand 14 just because more teams. I think you're going to see guarantees, probably 3-3 and 2-2. The Big Ten and SEC each get 3 teams guaranteed. The ACC and Big 12 get guaranteed 2 and something like that. And then a group of 5 champ gets in, and then you've got like 3 open spots, and it could be all 3 SEC some year, or a mix or whatever for the at-larges. That I think that's probably likely. And, but overall, Rob, I found this very entertaining. I found it really, I enjoyed, I covered 2 of the on-campus games, incredible atmospheres. I mean, just, it was like celebratory at Notre Dame. Like, wow, this is great. And Indiana fans were pretty cool too. At Ohio State, it felt like the intensity was there from the home fans and the 40,000 or whatever Vols that unfortunately invaded the North and were repelled.
I have no sympathies for those folks after the Tax Slayer Bowl and having to listen to Rocky Top as many times.
Yes.
Oh, they scored again.
Yeah, last year at the Citrus, and then Dayton. Oh, that was tough. That overtime loss.
There's a history there.
Yeah. So overall, I loved what this tournament did. I think it's good for college football. I wrote, and it ended up in print in the New York Times this week, about how this is the Big Ten's. The Big Ten is really flexing now, and not just on the field, but everything surrounding it is elevating the Big Ten. You've got with NIL that big corporations are able to funnel money, which is able to go get great players. Now with starting July 1st, the likelihood of the schools paying these players, that's gonna, and Iowa's gonna go the cap. Most teams in the Big Ten will as well. They're gonna find the money to pay players. And as we know, that it's not the golden toilets in your football facility that's going to lure these people there, or the fact that there's puffers and smoke at your locker room. It's cold hard cash, and if you've got it, and they're gonna come. They will come, Ray. People will come, and you have the infrastructure to be successful. Plus, the tournament allows home games. And as we saw with Tennessee and Ohio State and SMU at Penn State, and in the future, you never know. Maybe in Iowa gets a home game and up comes Ole Miss, and it's 19 degrees, and Iowa's out there flexing, and Tennessee did okay in it, but when you get in the deeper South, oh my gosh, so the Big Ten's got a chance here, and so it's leveled the playing field, because the SEC has a better base of talent, and it's now kind of having a migration effect. And I expect the Big Ten not to win it every year by any stretch, but to be in the ball game most years.
And obviously from our interest, for the people who are listening to the podcast, their interests, we wonder how Iowa fits into that equation. Obviously has that strength of the Big Ten financially, exposure-wise, to help it build solid programs throughout the athletic department, and that's what you hope for in a situation like this. And it starts with football. That's the front porch. And we're halfway through January. Guys are getting back to campus. The off-season conditioning will start soon, and run into spring football, which will be important. And we found out at the end of last week, Scott, that the newest addition that made the most noise, Mark Gronowski from South Dakota State, has some injury that he needs to address with a surgery and will be out for spring football and not back to not they hope he will be back in June. It sounds like, he's been
Yeah.
looked at and all that stuff, and the coaching staff and the doctors feel confident he'll be back. You never know with surgery. There's always a possibility it doesn't. I don't think Cagle recovered as well as he thought and the coaches thought. Different situation, but just an example that medical stuff you just never know. But somebody asked me the other day how I thought it impacted Scott, and I'll go briefly here because I'll let you extol on this one. For me, the it's a wait and see with Iowa's offense at this point in the game through this decade. I'm at the point now where great, there's a quarterback here that maybe can get this thing going. I feel good about that. But until I see him on the field performing on a Saturday against a real opponent, it's just hope at this point. And I've had a lot of hope in recent years that hasn't been met. So that's where I am. It's not ideal. You want a guy to go through spring practice, chemistry, continuity, just being out there, taking reps, all of those things, not ideal. But I don't think this determines whether or not Mark Gronowski is going to be a success at Iowa.
No. Here's some things that I could kind of throw out there that I do know about this is he had, I think it's slightly torn labrum. It's a surgery that, it takes 4 to 5 months to recover from to be 100%. So he'll be ready, perfectly ready by June.
Really common baseball injury.
Yeah.
Somebody who throws, it's at risk.
Baseball is much more intense for the joints and the ligaments and the muscles, so it'd be a longer recovery to be top speed than football. Well, it's like there's a reason why Nolan Ryan would warm up throwing football, before he'd pitch, just it gets your arm different angles and stuff. And in this case, it's an injury you can play with, but it is very painful and it can be detrimental. It could take miles per hour off your fastball. Which when you're playing in the North and you're playing against quality competition, you need, in the wind and what have you. So this was the smart move for him. Look at it from his perspective first. He was offered a hell of a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money. Look at Carson Beck, how much he's making. That's some of the money that he was offered from a few other schools. Iowa paid a lot for him. And it's kind of a split between the Swarm and post July 1st, which will be school. But this injury was investigated thoroughly by the medical staff. He was examined thoroughly. There's lots of conversations about whether he still wanted to try to go to the NFL. And he chose, that was his option. He was invited to participate in the East-West Shrine game. Accepted that invitation initially. It could have gone out there, but knowing what I know from the combine process, he probably would have gotten annihilated there, and everything would have been scuttled. They would have said you got to get surgery anyway, and then that'll hurt you everywhere possible. So that leads him back to college. Iowa, with its top medical staff that it has, examined it, figured it's an easy surgery, easy because it's not mine. They can take care of it. He can heal properly. He can be on campus. In his case, all the pluses that we know about, which is, taking a major step up from South Dakota State, as much as he was fantastic there, but a step up in competition, a step up with talent around you to compete at a high level. And if he figures if he's healthy in June, and he worked with his receivers, which he will, that by the time the season hits, he'll be right on track, and he'll be able to, and if he turns Iowa into a decent passing offense and he plays really well, then that will elevate him in the eyes of the NFL more than it is right now, which is not only was he a winner at the FCS level, but he was a winner in the Big Ten, did some good things at Iowa, proved himself. And this injury will just be a blip because it is, I won't say common, but it's not irregular. It's not as bad to the body as an ACL. Like Cade in the spring struggled with dropbacks, struggled to really, because you can't push off on that knee when you're dropping back. And so everything is taking advantage of. Here, he can do everything except probably throw in the spring. And as bad as that sounds, you could still take snaps. You could still, move and everything like that. So you can get integrated into the offense. So, I think the one issue that we know of here locally and how this applies to the fan psyche of Iowa is there's scar tissue at quarterback across the board from what Iowa fans have been duped or have been, jumped out on taking a leap of faith and, unlike Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade and falling all the way down to the bottom instead of stepping across there. And then you've also got people who, Cade certainly did not live up to his, standing. So I understand all of it. But it's also the game you play. You're a fan of the Jets. Yeah, I'm a fan of the Bears, unfortunately. You just have to, you can't just say, well, that one sucks, so we'll never do it again. We're never going to go out and recruit a quarterback again through the portal. Well, no, what are you going to do then? You're just going to wait and say, okay, well, maybe Jimmy Sullivan's our guy. Well, what about the next? You gotta keep swinging, man.
Yep.
And it costs money. It costs a lot of money in the quarterback market. It's a ton. It's way more than everybody ever would think it would be. But it's the market. And if you don't have one, we saw what Iowa did in 22, 23. 23, you win 10 games in the Big Ten West with the worst offense in 40 years. That's never going to happen again. You've got to have an offense. You've got to have a quarterback. When his shoulder is repaired and ready to go, I will put him up against any of the other quarterbacks in the portal, including Carson Beck, Miller Moss, Bo Pribula, any of those guys. I understand the scar tissue though, and the reluctance to embrace it because we've all seen there. We've all been there. We've all tried to buy in. And every time it's like, yeah, Lucy keeps holding on to that football.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, I'm just, hope for the best. You think, you play in your mind the scenarios, what's going to make Mark Gronowski a success here. And somebody asked me this on the mailbag the other day, how will we know at the end if he was a success? And it's more than just, I think he's almost I don't know if first example is the right way to frame it, but he is kind of the guy who can, because I don't really think last year there was a foundation, or maybe it was a slight foundation, but maybe finish the foundation and build up from there of what Tim Lester wants to do on offense. And if Mark Gronowski can come here and be successful, that shows other potential guys that want to transfer here at that position that it can help. So he's carrying more than just wins and losses this year. He's the guy, and it also helps that he's it's not Hank Brown, right? He's got experience. So when he comes back from injury, he's not starting from a low level. He's got experience at winning championships. So you have that going for you too. As Scott said, he can do dropbacks, he can take snaps, he can work on chemistry with other parts of the offense during the spring. For those that don't know, summers are 7-on-7 time for Iowa. That's when he'll work a lot if he's healthy. That's when he'll go full bore with his receivers, tight ends, get continuity, timing, things like that down. So it's not a catastrophe. It's not ideal. Ideally, you would want him here now throwing right away.
Yeah.
Not the case. But it's also not a death sentence to what he can do this year. I think he carries a lot of weight on his shoulders. He's being well compensated for it, but he's really the guy that you hope takes this offense where it wants to go. And then when he's done, you build on that, whether it's Hank Brown or somebody else, to take it and keep it keep it to the level where we've all wanted it to get to.
My biggest fear is, for Iowa across the board, is that the fans can be relentless if somebody doesn't live up to their expectations. More than a lot of places, not every place, but
And unfortunately, those expectations are often unrealistic.
yeah, one person that comes to mind is Adam Woodbury.
That's a good one.
People saw him top 50 player. His strength was he was a great rebounder, he was a great passer, not necessarily a great scorer. Well, in basketball, you're 90% of the people judge you by your scoring.
Yep.
And just the relentlessness of the fans coming after him. And now you've got Mark Gronowski, who's making a lot of money, and fans are, how it is. I mean, it was that way with Cade, and he wasn't making anywhere near what Gronowski's making. And that's, to me, is the problem that, if he goes out there and he throws an interception at Iowa State, well, he should have been, we should have got somebody else, fire Brad, even though he's,
yeah, because the reasoning will be, well, he didn't have spring practice.
Yeah, right. We should have known that.
Yep.
Well, they knew it. They investigated. It took time. That's why it took him longer to commit. And then also Miami and Texas Tech and a few other schools really tried to sweeten the pot and come after him, and he took less and came to Iowa. But but here's some things that and again, skepticism is perfectly warranted. I agree with it. However, under Tim Lester, things have changed. Here's a few numbers I'll throw out there and how they have improved. Passing game, we know it's tough because last year they didn't have any quarterbacks, and they were playing with a walk-on at the end of the year. Cade certainly didn't measure up to whatever you want, but offensively in 2023, they averaged 234.6 yards, which was last in the country. And of course, as I said, worst in the Big Ten since 1984. This year, they averaged 328.8, which was the most since 2020. So that was a jump of what? Do my math. 86 yards per game more.
Yeah.
That's good considering the quarterback play was, Brendan Sullivan did some nice things, but wasn't, it was in the same ballpark, frankly, as the other one. Red zone touchdown percentage. I don't count red zone percentage because to me, field goals are, if you're in the red zone, it should be automatic.
You should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Touchdown percentage the year before, 40%. In 22, 44%. In 21, 40%. Last year, 63.4%. The last 2 years combined, last 2 years, 22 and 23, 12 touchdowns in the red zone, 14 in the red zone. This year, 26. So they had just as many this year alone versus last 2 years combined. Finally, third down percentage, which I think is a huge stat, extending drives, 41.3%. That was the highest outside of 1 year under the Brian Ferentz era. In 18, they were 43.4. So 41.3, the second highest since 2015. So you're looking at really, some really big jumps in a lot of areas. Of course, we know the run game numbers. We don't even have to go there. Under what Tim Lester, and I would say scheme had a lot to do with it because your tight end play wasn't as productive. You struggled there. Wide receivers were still very inconsistent. The numbers that they had were comparable to what you've had in the past as far as number of catches and everything. So scheme mattered, and how you executed that scheme mattered. And running game, was a critical element as well. But I just look at it like this, that he's shown me enough that he knows what he's doing, which, maybe before we weren't so sure. And I think this is, you put the right guy in that driver's seat with a pretty good line, the guts of a pretty good line ahead of you. You got 3 starters returning. a receiving core that I think is getting better, and you bring in a guy who's pretty good in Sam Phillips, decent running backs. I think there's a real chance this thing could really grow. And of course, points per game went up from 15.4 to 27.7. So that's a lot of progress. Passing game didn't have it. Everybody else did. If you bring in the quarterback who's as good as he's advertised, who has, I've seen with my own eyes, on TV anyway, but is really good. I think there's a reason now to have hope and faith. Well, the other time was just plug your nose, close your eyes, and go, I hope this happens. Now you can say, you know what? I think it can happen. I think it can be good. And if it can be good, then you could be competitive if your $1.9 million defensive coordinator has a bounce back season.
Yes. And, it'll be a more equitable, complementary football setup moving forward, because obviously the defense loses a lot and has question marks next year. Probably more question marks than the offense at this point, I would say, just in terms of guys that are established.
Yeah.
So that'll be an interesting dynamic, a little bit different than we've experienced here in a while. One thing I want to hit on here, Scott, Trip Manfro, the one and only from social media platforms. He's on every social media platform. Entertaining. Check him out. PFAC 51. He asked me, and I love the word, so I want to use his word. Were fans hoodwinked? Don't get when you can use hoodwinked in a sentence, you're doing well. And Tripp was able to do that. So by the Mark Gronowski, and he was talking specifically about the swarm, and we see the process of, Brad getting on there and soliciting donations when Iowa's going after somebody that they really want, because it's not a few bucks, it's a lot of bucks. And I guess the question, and I think it's fair, because and again, this may not be as big an issue. It won't be as big an issue if the House passes it in next year, because these situations, you won't be asking as much from your fans and donations, but for big money guys, you still will. How much transparency should there be? Should fans have known ahead of time that Mark Gronowski was going to have surgery before donating money? And I'm not talking like 10 or 15 bucks a quarter, 25 bucks. I'm talking real money, couple thousand bucks. I can see how that would rub people the wrong way, because they're investing in it and they want to know what they're investing in. So I get that, and I understand that. Would people have not donated had they known the situation? Would it have better just to lay that out there? And I think some people were kind of put off by the Friday night news dump that Iowa used to get this news out there. So I see both sides of this. I understand Iowa's side of this, and I also understand the fans' side of this. And it's the whole new world that we're living through now, Scott, that wasn't here before.
Yeah, I understand why fans can be upset. And I'll just say, in this specific case, I wouldn't be upset, but the system requires it, because until this money goes internal, until the schools themselves can pay, which is July 1st, if the House settlement, it's got pre-approval.
Please, let's just get it done.
Yeah. If it happens, then, the problem is that in the sense NIL was passed and what have you, is you've asked the fans to do more and more and more, pay for these players to come in, pay for, the playoff. If you're Ohio State fans, you got to, you have a home game, but then you're going to the Rose Bowl, you're going to the Cotton Bowl. Now you're heading to Atlanta, you're asking your fans to do a ton, to travel, and you're spending all this money. And it's like, this isn't just monopoly money. You can't just, this is real. And for some donors, that's okay. But for a lot of them, it's not. It's a lot of money. So the system itself is shattered, and it needs, and hopefully this House settlement coalesces it to the point where something can be built going forward that has some sort of, frame of it. I can understand fans feeling like, oh man, I didn't know this was going to happen. That is understandable. But I also think Okay, so you're not going to go get this quarterback who's going to be fine for the season, who's going to be healthy by the summer, because fans were like, "Oh, I'm not paying that for him. He's broken." And I think after a while, it's like, dude, what do you do here? You can't just crowdsource everything. Now, the money part of it, yes, they're going to try to get more and more money, and it's not just for him. It's
Yeah,
for Sam Phillips. It's to make sure that, they're still looking at defensive backs and a left, or, some sort of tackle, um
taking care of your guys that are here.
and your guys here. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's still guys that, I mean, the portal may be closed for now, but it opens up again in April. And what if somebody has a really good spring, but it's like, I can't I can't start on the defensive backfield, and somebody gets, you want to make sure you pay your guys. So that's all fine. I guess I'm more anxious about the system, about getting the system changed, because then you're not putting the onus on every fan. You can still donate. The athletic department, which is got it more infrastructure to bring in people and their money through the I Club, or to get the rich older crowd that has no knowledge of the swarm.
Yeah.
They're the
Yeah.
ones that they can really be part of it. And so hoodwinked, I don't know, man. I mean, it just, if anything, I'm actually praising Iowa for being transparent, because it took all the way over the weekend before he committed, because they wanted to be sure that the shoulder wasn't just bad, and he wanted to make sure this was the right move. And then by that Friday, I did get a call earlier in the day saying, "Hey, he's not going to be able to throw this spring." And I was like, "Okay, I'll start looking into this." And then probably an hour later or whatever is when they released it. And I thought, you know what? For the second week in January, they're telling everybody this. They're not waiting. The old days with Kirk, when would we find out? March, when spring practice opened. He'd say, "Yeah, well, because the other guys, they don't tell us about who's going to get a cleanup." So
Yeah.
I think it's, and the other part, this is a lot of Iowa fans look at it, things like this. Just, they don't see the big picture and know that this happens everywhere. Every single school deals with this in the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, whatever. So be a little more global. It sucks.
And
You
it's the
work.
scar tissue you were talking about earlier. They're thinking about Cade. They're thinking about Proctor. They're thinking about,
Mhm.
the big name guys that have been, they've gone with in the portal. This is the next one. And they're like, oh shit, here we go again.
Yeah.
Again, each case is different. And, as I said on the mailbag the other day, I would hope, with as much as Iowa is investing in Mark Gronowski, that this has been clearly vetted. The medicals are been gone over back and forth to the point where they feel good about making the investment. I don't think you have any, very, very little unknown here
Mhm.
if you're going in with this investment.
They spent a lot of time with him on his visit, the hospitals and the doctors. And when he was kind of looking at making a final decision, the doctors weren't around on Sunday night, so they were starting to, talk a little bit more on Monday and making sure everything was fine, because that's one thing. Iowa isn't jumping into this. Iowa does want a quarterback like Mark Gronowski. And it was one where, when he hit the portal, from what I was told, it was like, exactly like I've said, go get him. And I don't want to hear any
Prescott.
excuses. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, go. But when he did hit the portal, it was like, no excuses, go get him, period. And all the numbers that we know about the passing game, they knew it too. So they went out and good on Iowa. They went out and got the best quarterback, I thought, on the free agent market. And a 1-year guy, yes, he's got an issue, but again, how many cleanups are there in the NFL after a season? And well, he'll be ready for OTAs in June. Oh well,
Yep.
here we're freaking out. So I would just say it's the scar tissue of the past. If he can come in and play really well, and if, say, Hank Brown or Jimmy Sullivan gives you a chance in the future to go, you know what, I feel good about the future too, then this will subside a little bit. Then you'll feel like, yeah, I think we're okay here. But again, I understand it. I share it to an extent. I've seen it. I had to write about it. All the woes of the past. So, and one final number I'll throw out there, just for the shits, is under Nate Stanley in 3 years in the red zone. He threw 45 touchdowns and 1 interception. And we all remember the interception because it was at Penn State on the goal line.
Yep.
In the last 5 years since he left, 29 touchdowns combined and 5 interceptions in the red zone. So 20 in 25 plus passes, Nate Stanley in his 3 years, 80. Last 5 years combined, 72. So
yeah.
And Nate Stanley, we know, was a good quarterback. Not a great quarterback, a good quarterback. A lot of good numbers, did a lot of nice things, and would look like a superstar the last 5 years. Mark Gronowski is a better quarterback than he is.
Yes, everybody knew when Tim Lester came in that the receiver room and the quarterback room needed to be fixed. I was working on it. It wasn't going to be a quick fix.
Mm-hmm.
This is the next step, and we'll see where it goes, because the previous guy really brought it down and it needed to be rebuilt. And he has a new job. We learned last night he is headed to Fresno State as the tight ends coach. And he is Brian Ferentz, if you have no idea who we're talking to. But I'm guessing if you're listening to the podcast, it's a good spot for him. I'm sure there's a connection there with Entz. They know each other, recruiting, stuff like that. I think it's a good spot for him to get himself back into the game.
Yeah, it sure is. Because Brian is a really good coach, individually. The coordinator thing didn't work out. We know that. We talked about it ad nauseum for too long. But
I don't think there's a lot of guys where you could say you could hire him as a tight end or an offensive line coach, and he'd be really good.
Absolutely, he'd be great. And I was, I don't know, I was cautiously watching North Carolina, thinking that, oh yeah, he's gonna, Bill's gonna hire him in some role, and he never did. And I don't know if that was something on the radar or not. But going to Fresno, he's gonna have to rebuild his image, but people in the industry know if he's good or not. And I think, he was an analyst last year at Maryland. This year he's a tight ends coach. He's bouncing around. He'll probably have another opportunity sooner than later. I mean, if Entz does a good job, I mean, that who knows? I mean, that could be like if they go like 9-3 this year, maybe in Arizona opens up or something like that, and he goes with them. And so I think, I'm happy for Brian personally. I want him to do well. And he is a good positional coach, and I think he'll be fine there.
To give us an idea of what was available to him, though, as well. How much damage did he do to his reputation here? I think this kind of answers the question. It's not an entry-level position, but it also ain't working in the Power 5.
No, you're right.
Whatever it is now.
Yeah, I mean, they're like the Power 4+2 there.
Yeah.
Because they'll be in the Pac, whatever it is, in a couple of years. And, this comes back to everything a few years ago, Rob, when the offense wasn't working. Let's say 2021, they won the division, but we saw the back half of that season. It just wasn't going anywhere. And, they got destroyed by Michigan. They lost those games to Purdue and Wisconsin back to back, where it was just like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
That's when he should have left. That's when he should have left and tried to go to the NFL, be an offensive line coach, be a tight ends coach, do something different, get out. It would have been, I as I mentioned before, I had an AD in the Big Ten when I was just shooting the shit with, and he's like, between you and me, he goes, I just can't see why he stayed, why he wouldn't subject his dad to that, and why he didn't want to just venture off, because all the scrutiny and then this goes on Kirk's resume too. Kirk has a Hall of Fame resume. He's gonna, next year he's gonna win a minimum 2 games, and they're gonna be he's gonna pass Woody Hayes for the most wins by a Big Ten coach. But in the final analysis, when you write this whole thing, that is that's something on there. And the nepotism discussion, this is what happens. And it ended up doing more harm to his son's career than helped him.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and we'll always wonder during this stretch of Iowa football history what may have been had Iowa had an offense because, 20 years down the road, people will be talking about how good these defenses were and the guys that played on those defenses. Well, why didn't they win more? Why weren't they more successful? And that's the part of history that people will tell and can't go back on that. So, all right, let's take a break here. Support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. Let's hear from a few more sponsors now. Scott and I will be back on the other side to talk some hoops. Hang tight.
Man. Ah.
And welcome back to the Hotspot podcast, where we can let you know that switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on the lights. We switch TV channels. Some of us switch partners while square dancing. Well, that's a stretch. But what's not a stretch is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, State Farm agent Chad Birch, right here in Iowa, can switch you over so you can start saving today. Chad and his team are ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood. With Chad Birch, it's easy to switch and save. Just give him a call. When you want the real deal, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Scott, I got some news for you.
Yeah. I just
Scoreboard Entertainment Centers have gone on hiatus, so we won't have the read. I read it another time on Tuesday just to get that in there. It's kind of sad. They're going to maybe come back for football season, but that was the highlight read of our ads. But we hope they come back. We enjoyed having them here, and hopefully and if you're out there and you would like to advertise on our podcast, please contact Pat Hardy.
yeah.
But who is still with us? The good news is Black Angel is still with us, downtown Iowa City. Perez Brothers owned and operated, formerly of El Banditos and Perez Tacos. Great food. Scott is a fan. Check them out. Black Angel Restaurant, downtown Iowa City. Scott, where do you want to start? The angst on women's basketball or the angst with men's basketball? I'll give you the choice.
I was just gonna interject. I just noticed who's not with us now is Bob Uecker. He just passed away. The Milwaukee Brewers released a statement. Very, very sad day. No more entertaining baseball broadcaster. Had some of the most iconic sayings, quips in history of sport and in life. One of my favorite people to ever watch and listen to passed this morning. And I just saw it on the ticker here. And so a very sad day for those of us, who remember Major League very, very well, the movie. And then just had the pleasure to listen to him call baseball once in a while on NBC back in the 80s or 90s during like the World Series. And then, of course, with the Milwaukee Brewers all those years.
Yep. I remember I think my first exposure to him being somebody who grew up in the East was the light beer commercials. Yes. So must be in the front row.
Yeah.
Good stuff with those.
Loved him.
But yeah, Bob, I think, gave a lot more to the game than he took.
Yeah.
And that's always good when you can say that, and I think he lived a pretty eventful life that he enjoyed. And rest in peace. And I know a lot of Brewers fans in this area will pour one out for Bob today, and rightfully so.
And I should too, for that matter, because he's iconic. Now, I grew up with Harry Carey, of course, the people around here who love the Cardinals with Jack Buck, He's awesome too. Vin Scully is probably the greatest of all time. Out in New York, Mel Allen or whatever. Everybody, Harry Callis, an
Yep.
Iowa grad, Milo Hamilton, an Iowa grad. There's some great ones out there, and Bob is different. His self-deprecating humor is legendary, and but yeah, the commercials. I mean, those commercials from the late '70s, early '80s with him and John Madden and Steve Miserak and Ben Davidson and
Yeah,
Bubba Smith and
that was a great ad campaign, incredibly
yes,
good ad campaign.
yeah. So I know I went on a different path here,
Nah,
Rob.
man,
Think,
that's good. We love breaking news on here. I wish it was good breaking news,
uh,
but at least it brought back good memories. And that's again, that's a tribute to who he was.
yeah, fantastic guy. Well, you know what, Rob? Tonight is the women's basketball team plays Nebraska. It's they're on a 3-game losing streak. There are a lot of question marks out there. I know I don't, and I'm sure you're the same way. We don't try to be too hyperbolic, win loss. God, the sky is falling. Oh, they should be ranked or anything like that. I would just say that going into this game with a 3-game losing streak, that it's a very concerning time right now for women's basketball for Iowa. I think, losses happen to decent teams. When you're on the road at Illinois, that's a team you should beat. You don't win. Indiana at home, it's probably still a team you should beat, but it was close. You lost, you played hard, didn't work out. But this one to me is as much of a must win as you're going to have in mid-January, not because to get to the tournament. Don't worry about the tournament right now. You worry about getting your season back on track because there's a lot of talent here, but there's not a lot of chemistry. And I think some of it is just players who haven't played together for a while and they're still working on things. But at this point in the season, that's more of an excuse rather than a reason. And, and Jan has some work to do too. I think she's kind of struggling, in her midseason, trying to grasp at straws when something's not working, then making changes and then leaving people out. And I think right now, this is an awfully big game for Iowa. Because if you win, you beat a team that's pretty good, team that's one of your rivals, and you kind of have a little bit of confidence when going on a West Coast swing. If you don't, and you've lost 3 out of 4 at home, and you're
Yeah.
heading out west, in the most talented, deepest league in the country, things can spiral out of control very quickly, and it would be pretty crushing.
Yeah, it seems like the observers, we'll call them, are questioning Jan and her substitution patterns. And I know there's a push, a narrative out there that to go with the freshmen and play them. Um, I'm of the belief, Scott, that there aren't any quick fixes here. You knew going in, you were losing the greatest player in program history, the greatest player in Big Ten history, one of the best players in women's college basketball history, along with 3 really important players in Kate Martin, Gabby Marshall, and Molly Davis. I was turning the ball over. A lot of the kids on this team, women on this team, didn't have the ball in their hands at this level of basketball the previous years. Those
Mm-hmm.
4 that I just mentioned had the ball and were
Mm-hmm.
running the show. It was going to take time. There was going to be a learning curve. There was going to need to be development, as you said. It's not happened as quickly as everybody wanted it to, but I think you still have to work through this with all the players and figure out who can help you fix this thing. And hopefully things start to, chemistry starts to kick in, continuity, you get on a run. And the downside of this conference is it's really hard.
Yeah.
The upside of this conference is it's really hard. You can get some really good wins here moving forward. I think this is a talented team. It's just not playing like a team right now.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. That's where the questions lie, and that's where the questions are difficult for Jan, who I think if you lost faith in her, I'm not there at all. Jan's a tremendous coach. It's her first year. She, is as much as I'm using this term a lot, infrastructure is in place for success at Iowa, you are dealing with a lot of different dynamics, including, as you said, losing, all time, the greatest scorer in college basketball history. And you lose her and, not even a generational talent, a century talent in Caitlin Clark. That just changes everything. And so you've got players who were role players last year trying to take a step up to become front row players. And so instead of being the fourth option in the offense, and you got a wide open three because they're over helping on Kate Martin and Caitlin Clark, now the attention's skewed to you, looking at somebody like a Sydney Falter or Kylie Feuerbach steps in and she's, last year and come off the bench and then sometimes you have that open shot and you take it and you make it. And then, if you miss it, oh, well, you still have Caitlin Clark. Now it's not quite as easy to get in that ballpark. So you have that issue. And I think, then you have the 4 freshmen who play a lot, who've shown a lot. You have Taylor Stremlo, who maybe played her worst game against Maryland and maybe her best game against Indiana. And you have, Aaliyah Guyton, who's done nothing but get better. And you have Ava Hayden, who's shown a ton of potential. Tegan Malini, who's been kind of inconsistent, but has also a lot of talent. And then you throw in somebody like Lucy Olson, who we haven't mentioned yet, who's your best scorer, frankly, handles the ball, does everything you ask her to do. And then how does that fit with a Hannah Stolke, who is a 4, but doesn't really shoot the 3. So is that a kind of a wasted spot? Maybe she should go more to 5 and play, but then what about Addison O'Grady? You've got all these questions and there's not a lot of chemistry right now on the floor. Whereas last year, everybody knew their role. It's Caitlin's team. Kate is the glue, the enforcer. Gabby is a 3 and D. Molly Davis pushed the ball when she was out there. Hannah Stolke run the floor, very narrow role, defend the post, and that was it. And then everybody else, it's like, hey, she needs a breather, come in, step in, whatever. Now it's all fluid and it's all versatile and it's all this stuff. My only issue, I guess, with what happened the other day with substitution patterns is you've invested a lot in Lucy Olson. She's your best scorer. Get her on the floor at the end of games. She's capable of getting a steal. She's capable of making a shot. And I think Taylor McCabe is somebody that needs to be on the floor a lot more going forward. But you know why? Because she's their 3-point shooter. And I think this team probably needs to maybe simplify things, go back to their roots a little bit, play a little bit more like last year, which is up and down the floor, play fast, and run the floor. Because it's just they're trying to do too much and there's not enough chemistry to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think Hannah misses Caitlin more than anybody, with, their connection of running the break. Yeah. I mean, she got a lot of bad. She was the one that could catch Caitlin's passes, and Caitlin trusted her, and they got a lot of easy baskets that way. Those aren't as available now. You don't have somebody running the break like that now. So again, there was going to be a feeling out process of who can do what well, and they're still figuring that out. But they've reached the point now where, what do you want to be? Where do you want to go? Because the time is now. If you keep losing games, you're not going to like where this season goes. So figure it out. Figure out how to play with each other. Figure out how, what you can do to accentuate each other's strengths and have each other's backs. You don't want this being a freshman versus veteran thing because that's what's happening on the outside. Yeah. Focus on what you need to do. And if I'm Jan, I play the kids that are hot on a given night, or maybe go matchups and things like that. Whereas before, as Scott said, you had the set veterans that you knew were going to be there, and maybe you get a break here and there for somebody. Now you play matchups, you play who's hot, and you try to win that way. You have to, there's a little more strategy involved, right?
Yeah.
As the coach, you're going to have to figure it out. And I'm with Scott. I think Lucy Olson needs to be on the floor during crunch time, even if she's struggling. We saw it with Peyton Sanford. He was
Yeah.
really struggling. Then got hot in the second half of that Nebraska game, and he's kind of carried that over. Lucy will break out of it, but she's your most dangerous offensive player. She can create,
Yeah.
and you need her out there to do that. But I know Jan's trying to find the right buttons to push. She's a first year coach. None of this stuff is unexpected, Scott.
Exactly. It's easy to get trapped in the mindset of what we just experienced the last 2 years. And I think what we do is you measure that up and you think, okay, well, this team isn't as good, but it could still be this. It could still be
Yeah.
this. Well, we've reached the midpoint of the season. I mean, it's been 2+ months of basketball. You're playing in the Big Ten. There's legitimately 12 or 13 teams that are tournament worthy, and Iowa is among them. But there needs to be a few moments here where they all have to figure something out. And whether it's Jan doesn't have a Jan right now.
Yeah.
Now Abby Emmert Stamp is terrific. She's going to be a great coach sometime, head coach at some point. But Jan brought something to Lisa, and Lisa oversaw it too. And let's not dismiss Lisa Bluter's brilliance. And a lot of times, the best coaches, whether it's her or even Kirk at times, are good administrators. They see the bigger picture, and you let the other people handle your details. And there are new coaches who are, really smart. And, Raina's been around. I mean, Randy Henderson's has coached and played at Iowa. They all, it's just trying to build this thing on the fly has been a challenge. And, again, when it comes to chemistry and working together and stuff, I think there are reasons when they're talking about, say, struggles in November or December, they're more or less excuses at this point of the year.
Mhm.
But I do look at it this way, and this game is so paramount to me on this. If they could beat Nebraska, and then they go on the road to Oregon and Washington, that they can have a little bit of confidence and then maybe be able to build something together while they're on that road trip and have a bonding situation. I mean, going to Mexico for the Cancun Challenge was fine, but that's different. That's almost like a glorified vacation with a couple of games. They don't need a vacation. They need to get to work, and they need to do it at a place like, hey, they're on a charter, they fly to Oregon, they're sequestered, they're away from everything for a few days, get together, get in the gym, hang out together, learn something about each other, and then build something together that can last. And but I've noticed a team, Rob, that's lacking a little bit in confidence. You could tell just by the way they go up for shots near the bucket, some of
Yeah.
the bunnies that they miss. It's like, be more aggressive. If the defender's right there, arms up, and you're airballing it or you're missing it wildly, you're not even using the backboard. Don't be afraid to draw the foul. Be a
Yeah.
little more aggressive. Be more physical. So I think that's it's a learning opportunity. Teams go through adversity. They haven't dealt with this adversity in a long, long time. I think they're okay, but this is a game where it could spiral out of control if the wrong things happen tonight.
That's tonight, Thursday, January the 16th, 6 p.m. Central Time, Big Ten Network. If you don't make it to Carver, Iowa goes into this game at 2-4 in the Big Ten. Nebraska's the opposite at 4-2. Oregon is 4-3, and Washington is 3-3. So, as Scott said, really important stretch of 3 games with like teams near you in the standings. You can kind of separate here. Similar situation for the Iowa men, Scott. It looks like the Big Ten men's basketball standings in the first year with the expanded with four new teams. It looks a similar, very top heavy with a big bunch of teams in the middle. I'll bring up the men's standings now, and that'll segue us into the men's basketball discussion. Michigan State, Michigan, both undefeated at the top. Purdue 6-1. Illinois 5-2, Oregon 4-2, Wisconsin 4-2, Indiana 4-3, Maryland 3-3, Iowa 3-3, USC 3-3, Nebraska 2-3. So a lot of teams bunched up in that middle. Big game for Iowa on Friday at UCLA, who's 2-4, and I believe has lost 4 in a row. So they're going to be ready and geared up to beat Iowa. We'll find out, obviously the wildfires going on out there. I don't know if they settled on where that game will be played yet.
From what it sounds like, I think they were going to just try to finalize that today.
Okay.
As far as I know, that there was a discussion, they'd move it to somewhere else. I don't know, what is it? One of the side arenas, but
Yeah.
Mick Cronin wants to play it at Pauley Pavilion, and frankly, if you're Iowa, you want to play at Pauley Pavilion too. It is one of the cathedrals of the sport, and this is with expansion and realignment, that football took precedent in every single discussion. But when the thought popped up about basketball, I was like, oh, they're going to play at Pauley Pavilion as a legendary place, and I think that's something that you'd probably enjoy getting that atmosphere. But nevertheless, another huge game for Iowa, and it's, they haven't won on the road yet, and
they haven't looked very good on the road outside of the Michigan game, which was a good performance.
Yeah, it was good, but it was still,
not good enough.
Not good enough. And the other day they never led. They got way behind, 18 points or whatever it was, to USC, chopped it down, got it within points. But this is that's, to me, tells you everything you want to know about Iowa men's basketball when it becomes an issue. And that is, they have the offense to make a major run, to get into games, to have big runs, whatever. But when it's in crunch time, they don't have the defense to win those games on the road. They don't have the stop, force the action. And that, to me, it's problematic. And when you're in the Big Ten, you can't just build a resume of home wins only and believe you're a tournament team. You're going to have to take care of a couple of games, because you're going to slip up at home too. It's too good of a league. So you're going to have to be, whether you're, even if you're 10-10, you're going to have to be 7-3, 3-7, or 8-2, 7-3, something like that to be, or 3-7, whatever, just to make sure that you're in the tournament. And so I thought if they could split in this West Coast trip, it's all good. And if that's the same thing, if they win against UCLA, they're okay. I mean, what they did against Indiana was impressive. Although what Indiana did was not impressive.
No.
Not either game. And I wrote about Indiana for Monday. Just that, I mean, they lost to the other I teams that they've been playing for 120 plus years, each by 25 points, one on the road and one at home, and looked lifeless. I mean, can you imagine the podcasts for Bloomington right now? Whoa.
Yeah, I saw Mike Woodson bailed on his post-game radio interview. Yeah, it's not going good. That was after the Illinois game, which I think fans thought, well, maybe, all right, chalk it up, bad road game at Iowa. We're coming home, rival, Assembly Hall, we'll get going. And it just was not good. And if you look at it currently, the net rankings, Scott, Iowa's at 48. UCLA's at 38. They've had a tough schedule, real tough schedule. So that's a good opportunity for Iowa. As we said with the women, tough league, it's hard to win, but when you do win, you usually get quality wins. And Iowa has that chance moving forward. And if they could somehow get tomorrow night's game on Friday, January the 17th, it comes home for a pair of winnable games against Minnesota and Penn State. So I just feel like, Scott, with the men and women, it's going to be edge of your seat till this thing is over, because they're both going to be bubble teams.
Yeah, they are. That's the way they're playing. And and this may sound really weird. I have you can really look at the men and say, we know what they're about and how they're going to be. They're going to, I mean, even if they lose to UCLA, then they're going to come back and win those games. And they're going to still be in a position where at that point they'll be 5-4 and they're going to be kind of, then they're going to go beat somebody and then they're going to get annihilated by somebody else. They'll beat Wisconsin at home at the end of the year or Michigan State, but they'll get crushed by Purdue. It's just, the setup of this team and this program and what's going to happen there. The women are a little bit more of a question mark to me because there are so many different factors, including whether it's Jan or it's the players trying to mix and everything like that. And so as much as, if you were to ask me which is a more important game to win, it's the women, no question in my mind, because
who has a better chance to make the tournament, do you think, as we sit here today on January 16th?
I think the men, honestly.
I kind of agree with you. I think part of it is the difficulty. Again, you get the opportunities in the women's Big Ten, but man, there aren't any UCLA USCs in Big Ten men.
No. I mean, you're talking UCLA's number one, USC's what, 4 or 5, and got Juju Watkins, and they're both coming to Iowa City, which means that this is the good and the bad of the Big Ten, playing these West Coast teams. If you played Washington and Oregon at home, you feel like you probably have a little bit better chance to win.
Yeah.
On the road, it's 50-50, probably at best. USC, UCLA, you don't think you're going to beat them on the road at all. You probably aren't going to beat them at home either.
Yeah.
So now you're really in trouble. And Nebraska is their designated rival that they play twice, and they're not an easy opponent. And the other thing is, all these teams look at Iowa for what Iowa is, and it's their chance to get at Iowa. Iowa's still a name. Iowa still sells out their games.
Payback from just getting the sand kicked in their face the last 4 years.
Right. They've won 3 straight Big Ten titles. They've been to the national title game twice in a row. Yeah. They've played against some of these same players. It's not unlike what Michigan faced in football this year, except there was no Connor Stallions on the women's side. So they're just going to have to be mentally tough, and they're going to have to grow very quickly. They're capable of it. I think they've got the players to do it. It's somebody like Sida Falter stepping up and being the player you need to be. It's Jan figured out some rotations a little bit better. It's Hannah Stolke putting her in a better position to succeed because she's a really good player in a tough matchup. Taylor McCabe, probably get her out on the floor a lot more. And there's a couple other players that need to probably sit, or move off the rotation or be 8-minute players and stuff. So I don't want to quite go with where I think that needs to go because I'm not comfortable with that conversation. But I think that it seems to me that there are some options that they can have that can make things better.
And for the men, it's the same discussion we've had for years now. They have to defend, and they have to rebound.
Yeah.
And rebounding is a challenge because I think your best lineup is with Harding and Thelwell as your guards.
Yeah.
They're not the biggest guys in the world. And then you've got Dix, Sanford, and Freeman. That's a tough, with some of the size in the Big Ten, it's tough to rebound, but they're going to have to find a way.
Yeah. Yeah. The build of their lineup is makes it challenging because, and then, you could, and the good thing is we look at it from like a starting perspective, but it's really more about a minutes perspective. And, but you need more from Dembele. You need more from other players. Price Sanford's been really good off the bench, but you're going to need more size playing better because they're last in the league in rebounding margin. They're last in the league in defense, field goal percentage and scoring defense. Those are issues that aren't going to change. It's just the way it is. But
there's a reason that the 3 guys in the 2025 class are 6'10", 6'8", and 6'7". This team lacks interior depth.
Yeah. And Cooper Koch would have been great to have for some minutes there. So you've got issues. And to me, the scoring defense and the field goal defense It's always an issue, and it forever will be an issue as long as Fran's there. But it's also one that, well, that's the blueprint of what they do. The rebounding one is not part of that. They have been good rebounding teams before, and they need to be better there because it's like you've got two strikes against you in late game situations.
Yeah.
If you can't rebound and you can't defend, you better freaking hit some shots, or you better hope that they miss some. And that's one's a strategy you can work with. The other one's just one cross your fingers, and that's not how you win games or get yourself in championship situations.
We'll keep talking about it because it's going to be this way. I think we're going to have a roller coaster ride for both of these teams going through the winter. So I think we're going to be dealing with swings of emotion when it comes to the fan base, and we'll be here to talk about it. Let's wrap up with our picks, Scott. We got Notre Dame and Ohio State. You're talking about blue bloods, man. This doesn't get much deeper blue than this.
Exactly. Except for one team that is deep blue that's probably going, this is your penance for Connor Stallions.
Yeah. Yeah.
You get to watch Michigan State too, but you get to watch your two most hated teams square off for the national title. And
that should get you through off-season workouts.
Yeah, right. They should just play this on a loop, in the weight room. It's like, you need that extra rep. Here, take a look at this. Both of us were 2-0 last week. We both picked the right winners, and you are 76, 67, and 2 this year. That's
nice.
You're up 9. I'm 81, 62, and 2. So I did all right.
Hopefully people were on the Scott Docterman train this year and made some money.
Yeah, if they were on yours, they'd make some money too. So we did all right this year. Last one, the last line that I wrote down was Ohio State minus 8.5 against.
Did it start at 9?
Yeah, start at 9.
I think I saw it at 9 to open. So it's kind of stabilized. I thought it might move a little more.
That said, Rob, I am going with the Ohio State University to win the national title. That was the team I picked in the summer in our pick'ems for the Gazette, the Athletic. For the Athletic way, I had this matchup, Ohio State versus Notre Dame. I was one of 2 of us to do that.
Nice.
And I'm sticking with it. I think Ohio State's too good, too deep. Too many great areas. I think there's a few holes Notre Dame has that can be exploited. And I think I got them like 24-13 in this one.
I'm with you. I'm going to ride with Ohio State as well in the Big Ten. I think I really like Notre Dame's defense.
I do too.
It's fun to watch. And I'm interested to see how it matches up with all the players on Ohio State's offense. But I think Ohio State's defense is closer to being as good as Notre Dame's defense than Notre Dame's offense is as being close to as good as Ohio State's offense. And for that reason, I think they win by 10 points, maybe 14, but kind of in that range. And I think it's going to be a fun game and a good game, and I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm excited for it. And as you said, you have Ohio State, who is number 1 in scoring defense, number 1 in total defense, number 1 in all these categories. And then you have Notre Dame, which is kind of like Iowa with an exponent, which is reliant upon turnovers, reliant upon turning those turnovers into points. I mean, they had, going into last week's game, I think it was 18, they're plus 18, had 31 turnovers and scored 134 points off those turnovers. Wow. And the other team was like, their opponents were like at 35 points or something like that. So, I mean, you have like 100 points-ish swing between your points versus theirs off turnovers. Riley Mills being out at defensive tackle is a killer. Xavier Watson's a fantastic defensive back. I love watching their offense too. I like the way Riley Leonard plays. Their passing game is the one area where it's a real deficiency.
Yep.
And against Ohio State, if they get in a situation where they have to throw the ball, we saw what happened with Texas, got in that situation. Jack Sawyer he's like the equivalent of, who's like Iowa guy. Jack Campbell, maybe.
I'd say Jack or Josie probably.
Josie, yeah, Josie. Let's use Josie. Personality wise, he's a lot closer to Jack Sawyer too. And he's like Pickerton High School in Columbus, and just he's the one who fought Michigan when they tried to plant the flag, all that kind of stuff. And he comes up with that game. And it was funny because after the Ohio State Tennessee game, I was asking him how you guys kind of mentally regroup yourself after that loss. He goes, I hate to even admit this, but I didn't leave my house for 3 days. He's like, I don't even want to say it because I want to make him think that they're living like rent free in my head, but that's how much that game meant to us. And so, yeah, they are living rent free in his head, but it's pushed them all to that point where you lost your rivalry game, but you're going to win the national title. And again, for the Big Ten, they put them, now they have put themselves in a position where you had 2 in the Final Four, 3 in the Final 8, 4 in the playoff. Illinois made a really strong impression this year. Iowa's still a quality team. Going back to Mark Gronowski, it's a hell of a move for Iowa. I think they're right there. Minnesota played really well this year. Michigan made a real statement at the end of the season. I think Washington weathered its big drop off.
Yeah.
I like the prospects of this conference, and going forward, I think it's going to, you never know. Nebraska might really take another step forward. So I think this is a league that, Penn State's going to be great. And Ohio State's going to capture the national title.
And that will be a great advertisement for the Big Ten moving forward as we go through these strength wars of who's the mightiest in the land.
Yeah.
And if the Big Ten can win on Monday night and hold that mantle through the offseason and into next year, and maybe build on it even more, because it's an important time to see who is the king and who can remain the king. Because the SEC had a heck of a long run, man.
Yeah.
And if that can be bucked and trend changed, I think it's good for the sport overall.
Absolutely. It's fantastic. I mean, because the regions have a rivalry that dates centuries in worse areas, but I think they peer one another. And when you're looking, like I wrote about this, Paul Feinbaum's like, we have nothing but to hide our head in shame. The Big Ten is, winning these titles. And you don't think that's going to be a message from Greg Sankey to Alabama, to Georgia, to LSU and beyond, that we need to get better. We can't let this happen again. And the Big Ten is like, we can compete now. Michigan went out and, slapped around, Alabama. I still think one of the most impressive wins all along was Illinois beating South Carolina.
Yeah.
That was a great performance for Illinois. And when you think about all the, we needed to have more teams in the playoff, and then Illinois goes out and does that, and Illinois is like, you know what, we're 10-3. Our losses came to Penn State on the road, Oregon on the road, and to a really good Minnesota team. I think there's a lot to build on there, which of course spins us all the way around full circle to say this is why Iowa had to go pay a lot of money to go get Mark Gronowski.
No doubt. And we'll obviously keep track of that through the offseason. Did want to mention, is it tomorrow night? Yes, tomorrow night, 6:00 over at Carver Hawkeye Arena is All-American Night. Iowa wrestling, men's wrestling will welcome Illinois in, and that is a 6 p.m. Central Time beginning to that duel, and that is on the Big Ten Network, as well as the Iowa women tonight at 6:00 against Nebraska from Carver Hawkeye Arena. So a couple Big Ten Network telecasts from Carver the next 2 nights at 6 p.m. And again, the men are 8:00 tomorrow night out at UCLA. So there's your local rundown, TV schedule, to-do list, all that good stuff. And we'll be back to talk about all that stuff next week on the Hotspot podcast. But I think we've exhausted everything we can talk about today, or at least we're willing to talk about. So we'll be back next week. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you next week. Say goodbye, Scott.
Goodbye, Scott.